In this episode, we dive into the horrific last moments of a zookeeper eaten alive by a lion to a nighttime guard getting into an unexpected face-to-face with a jaguar. But first, let's start with our first story. The evening of March 12, 2017, brought unseasonably warm weather to Phoenix, Arizona. The desert city basked in 78-degree temperatures as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. At the Phoenix Zoo, the day shift was winding down, and the evening crew was preparing for the transition that occurred every day at exactly 5:30 p.m. Sarah Chen had always been drawn to big cats. At 31, she possessed the rare combination of fearlessness and respect that made her exceptional at her job. With 7 years of experience working with large carnivores, Sarah had recently earned her promotion to senior big cat keeper, a position that came with additional responsibilities and the trust of her colleagues. Her co-workers described her as meticulous, someone who never cut corners when it came to safety protocols. On this particular evening, Sarah was working with Mufasa, a 450-pound male African lion who had been at the Phoenix Zoo for 8 years. Mufasa was known for his impressive mane and relatively calm demeanor, though like all male lions, he possessed the strength to kill with a single swipe of his massive paws. The feeding area needed to be cleaned after the day's final meal, a routine task that Sarah had performed hundreds of times before. The fatal mistake occurred during what should have been a routine procedure. Sarah was preparing to enter the feeding area to hose down the platforms where Mufasa had eaten his evening meal. Standard protocol required that the lion be secured in his holding den with the shift gate, a hydraulic barrier between the main enclosure and holding area, properly locked in place. Earlier that day, maintenance staff had reported issues with the hydraulic system controlling the shift gate. The primary mechanism had malfunctioned, requiring the use of a backup manual lock. This secondary system demanded physical verification that the gate was fully secured, something that required the keeper to visually confirm the lock's position. At 5:45 p.m., as the Arizona sun cast long shadows across the zoo grounds, Sarah entered what she believed was the secure feeding area. She had checked the control panel, which indicated the gate was closed, but she hadn't performed the visual verification required when using the manual backup system. The hydraulic gate had only partially engaged, leaving a gap just wide enough for a determined 450-pound lion to push through. African lions are powerful predators with jaws that deliver 650 pounds per square inch and claws up to 1.5 inches long. They can sprint up to 50 miles per hour and are strong enough to break a zebra's neck in one bite. Even in captivity, they retain their deadly instincts and reflexes. Sarah was 30 feet from the keeper exit, hosing down the feeding platform, when she heard the metallic scraping sound of the gate being forced open. She turned to see Mufasa emerging from the holding area, his golden eyes fixed directly on her. In that moment, Sarah had approximately 8 seconds to react, 8 seconds that would determine whether she lived or died. Her training kicked in immediately. Sarah dropped the hose and began backing toward the keeper exit while speaking in calm, low tones, exactly as she had been taught. But Mufasa's predatory instincts had been triggered by her sudden movement and the confined space of the feeding area. The lion's powerful hindquarters bunched as he prepared to charge. Sarah managed to activate her emergency radio, broadcasting a brief code red big cats before Mufasa closed the distance between them in 3 powerful bounds. The attack was swift and devastating. The lion's massive paws knocked Sarah to the concrete floor, and his jaws clamped down on her neck with crushing force. Other staff members heard the emergency call and arrived within 2 minutes, but they could only watch helplessly from outside the enclosure. Zoo protocol prevented them from entering during an active attack, leaving them to use water hoses and noisemakers in a desperate attempt to distract the lion. Their efforts had minimal effect on an animal operating purely on instinct. The attack lasted approximately 2.5 minutes, an eternity for those watching but mercifully brief for Sarah, who lost consciousness within the first 30 seconds due to blood loss and trauma. When the tranquilizer dart finally took effect, Mufasa slowly released his grip and retreated to a corner of the enclosure. Emergency medical personnel rushed in, but Sarah's injuries were too severe. The lion's powerful jaws had caused massive trauma to her neck and shoulder, severing major blood vessels. She was pronounced dead at the scene, becoming the first keeper fatality in the Phoenix Zoo's 57-year history. The incident led to immediate changes in zoo safety protocols nationwide. The Phoenix Zoo implemented mandatory double verification systems for all shift gates, requiring 2 staff members to confirm that barriers are properly secured before any keeper enters an enclosure. The tragedy also sparked discussions about whether single-keeper protocols should be eliminated entirely for work involving large carnivores. Sarah's story highlighted the dangers faced by those who work with apex predators in controlled environments. Another tragedy would soon demonstrate that the risks extend beyond experienced keepers to the veterinarians who provide medical care for these magnificent and deadly creatures. September 8, 2015. Dawned with the kind of perfect weather that made San Diego famous worldwide. The morning temperature held steady at 72 degrees, with a gentle ocean breeze carrying the scent of eucalyptus across the sprawling grounds of the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. Wispy clouds drifted across an azure sky, creating ideal conditions for both visitors and the dedicated staff who cared for over 4,000 animals across 1,800 acres of carefully maintained habitat. Dr. Michael Rodriguez had always possessed the steady hands and calm demeanor essential for working with the world's most dangerous animals. At 38, he had built a reputation as one of the country's leading experts in large carnivore medicine, with over 15 years of experience treating everything from Siberian tigers to African lions. His colleagues described him as methodical and brilliant, someone who approached each procedure with scientific precision and unwavering focus. On this particular morning, Michael was preparing for a routine dental examination on Sari, a 12-year-old female Malayan tiger. Sari had been showing signs of dental problems during recent feedings, and the procedure was necessary to prevent more serious health issues. With fewer than 200 left in the wild, Malayan tigers are critically endangered. Females like Sari weigh up to 290 pounds and boast 1,050 psi bite force, nearly double that of a lion. They can leap 33 feet across, 16 feet high, and even snatch birds mid-flight. Even sedated, their muscles can react explosively if they wake. The critical mistake occurred during the pre-procedure calculations that determined how much anesthetic would be required to keep Sari safely unconscious throughout the dental work. Michael had been treating Sari for a minor respiratory infection over the previous weeks, and she had lost approximately 18 pounds during her recovery. However, when calculating the anesthetic dose, Michael used her chart weight of 245 pounds rather than her current weight of 227 pounds. This seemingly minor error resulted in an anesthetic dose that was slightly higher than necessary, but more critically, the dental examination began without incident. Michael worked methodically, cleaning Sari's teeth and examining her gums for signs of infection or decay. His technicians monitored her vital signs while he focused on the delicate work of treating a predator's dental issues. Everything appeared to be proceeding normally. 20 minutes into the procedure, the monitoring equipment began showing subtle changes in Sari's vital signs. Her heart rate increased slightly, and her breathing pattern shifted, early indicators that the anesthetic was beginning to wear off. Rather than stopping to administer additional sedation, Michael made the fatal decision to continue working. As he leaned over Sari's head to examine her final tooth, the tiger's eyes suddenly opened. Without warning, Sari's massive head lifted slightly, and her jaws reflexively clamped down on Michael's forearm. The bite was devastating. Her 3-inch canines punctured through his protective sleeve and deep into the muscle and bone of his arm. The sudden pain and pressure triggered an immediate predatory response in the partially sedated tiger. Michael's scream filled the examination room as he tried desperately to pull his arm free from Sari's grip. The 2 veterinary technicians immediately sprang into action, one preparing emergency sedation while the other attempted to open the tiger's jaws using a specialized tool. But Sari's bite force of over 1,000 pounds per square inch made their efforts futile. The attack lasted approximately 90 seconds, brief but devastating. Michael's struggles only seemed to intensify Sari's grip, and despite the presence of emergency equipment and trained personnel, They couldn't safely separate the tiger from her victim without risking further injury. Additional tranquilizers were administered directly into Sari's muscle, but it took nearly a minute for the drugs to take effect. When her jaws finally relaxed and released their grip, Michael collapsed to the floor, his arm mangled and his body going into shock from blood loss and trauma. Emergency medical personnel were called immediately, and Michael was rushed to the nearest trauma center. Despite the best efforts of human medical professionals and emergency surgery to repair the massive damage to his arm, Michael died from complications related to blood loss and infection 18 hours later. The incident led to immediate changes in veterinary protocols at zoos nationwide. New guidelines required immediate resedation at any sign of consciousness during procedures involving large carnivores, and continuous monitoring equipment was upgraded to provide more sensitive detection of awareness. The tragedy also led to mandatory weight verification within 24 hours of any anesthetic procedure. While Mikkel was another victim of large predators' explosive strength, another tragedy was already unfolding hundreds of miles away, where an experienced keeper whose life was taken by an unexpected gentle giant. June 19, 2014, brought the kind of sweltering heat that made Kansas City summers legendary for their intensity. By 7 a.m., the temperature had already climbed to 82 degrees with humidity levels that made the air feel thick and oppressive. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Kansas City Zoo, promising another day where both animals and staff would seek whatever shade they could find. Lisa Thompson had always possessed a natural affinity for the world's largest land mammals. At 27, she embodied patience and gentle strength. Her 4 years at the Kansas City Zoo had been marked by her ability to form deep bonds with the elephant herd, particularly with Shanti, a 28-year-old Asian elephant who had become her closest companion. Lisa's journey to elephant keeping had begun during college, where she studied animal behavior and spent her summers volunteering at wildlife sanctuaries. Her colleagues often marveled at how the massive animals seemed to respond to her presence with obvious affection and trust. On that fateful morning, Lisa faced a challenging situation that would test both her dedication and her judgment. Her regular partner, Jake Morrison, had called in sick with what appeared to be food poisoning, leaving Lisa to handle the morning routine alone. The Kansas City Zoo had a strict two-keeper rule for all elephant interactions, a safety protocol designed to ensure that one person could always assist if something went wrong. Management pressure to maintain schedules was intense during the busy summer season. Lisa had been told that finding a replacement keeper would take several hours, potentially disrupting the entire day's schedule and disappointing hundreds of visitors. Lisa entered the elephant barn alone, violating the facility's most important safety rule. She had worked with these elephants hundreds of times and felt confident in her ability to handle the morning routine safely. What she didn't realize was that Shanti had been displaying subtle signs of hormonal changes that mimicked must, a condition in elephants characterized by increased aggression and unpredictable behavior. Musth is a hormonal state that can affect both male and female elephants, often altering their behavior. In Shanti's case, early signs like posture shifts and touch sensitivity went unnoticed, as the changes were subtle and gradual. Asian elephants like Shanti are highly intelligent, with 12-pound brains and over 250 billion neurons, 3 times more than humans. Females weigh up to 8,000 pounds and can charge at 25 miles per hour, making them deadly despite their gentle nature. They form lifelong social bonds and can live up to 70 years. At 7:30 a.m., as the Kansas sun climbed higher and the temperature continued to rise, Lisa entered the elephant barn carrying the morning hay. The barn was a massive structure designed to house the zoo's 3 Asian elephants, with high ceilings, reinforced concrete walls, and specialized flooring that could withstand the weight and movement of these enormous animals. Shanti appeared calm as Lisa approached, her trunk swaying gently as she investigated the fresh hay. For several minutes, everything proceeded normally. Then suddenly the attack came with minimal warning. As Lisa bent down to examine a potential problem with one of the feeding stations, Shanti's behavior shifted subtly. Her ears flared slightly, a sign of agitation that Lisa, focused on her task, failed to notice. Shanti moved with surprising speed for such a massive animal. Using her enormous head, She pushed Lisa against the concrete wall of the barn. The force was devastating, 8,000 pounds of muscle and bone pressing against a human body that weighed barely 130 pounds. Lisa's ribs cracked under the pressure, and she struggled to breathe as Shanti held her in place. Lisa managed to activate her emergency radio with her free hand, broadcasting a desperate call for help. Other staff members heard the call and rushed toward the elephant facility, arriving within 90 seconds. However, they faced an impossible situation. Shanti was displaying defensive behavior, and entering the enclosure would likely result in additional casualties. They could only watch helplessly from outside the barriers as the situation unfolded. The assault lasted approximately 3 minutes. Shanti would press Lisa against the wall for several seconds, then step back, only to return moments later. This pattern suggested confusion rather than pure aggression. The elephant seemed uncertain about Lisa's presence and was responding to hormonal changes that altered her perception of familiar humans. Lisa's experience and knowledge of elephant behavior likely saved her from immediate death. She remained as still as possible during the attacks, avoiding sudden movements that might have triggered more aggressive behavior. Emergency responders arrived quickly with specialized equipment designed for elephant emergencies. A veterinarian administered a fast-acting tranquilizer, but elephants require carefully calculated doses due to their size, and it took nearly 2 minutes for the drugs to take effect. When Shanti finally backed away and moved to the far corner of the enclosure, emergency medical personnel rushed in to find Lisa conscious but severely injured. Her ribs were fractured, and she had suffered internal injuries from the repeated pressure against the concrete wall. She was immediately transported to the nearest trauma center. Despite the rapid response and excellent medical care, Lisa's injuries proved fatal. Internal bleeding and organ damage from the crushing force were too extensive to repair. She died during surgery 4 hours after the attack, surrounded by family members who had rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news. The tragedy led to immediate changes in elephant management protocols. The Zookeeper rule was reinforced with severe penalties for violations, and new behavioral monitoring systems were implemented to detect early signs of hormonal changes. The pressure to maintain schedules had led to the violation of the Zookeeper rule, and the facility's behavioral monitoring protocols were inadequate for detecting early signs of hormonal changes in female elephants. While Lisa lost her life doing what she loved, another tragedy was already brewing in the mountains of Montana. This time, the victim would be a seasoned curator whose decades of experience would prove insufficient against the primal instincts of a predator preparing for winter. November 14, 2016, brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Montana's landscape spectacular. The temperature hovered around 38 degrees in Billings, with a clear blue sky stretching endlessly over the rolling hills that surrounded Zoo, Montana. Golden leaves clung to the cottonwood trees, and the first hints of winter could be felt in the sharp morning air that promised snow within the coming weeks. Robert Hayes had spent the better part of 2 decades working with large mammals, building a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable curators in the Mountain West. At 42, he possessed the kind of deep understanding that came only from years of careful observation and hands-on experience with some of North America's most impressive predators. His colleagues described him as methodical and intuitive, someone who could read animal behavior with an accuracy that bordered on supernatural. On this particular afternoon, Robert was conducting his weekly inspection of the black bear habitat, preparing for the animal's upcoming winter hibernation period. Bruno and Bella, the facility's 2 North American black bears, were entering the hyperphagia phase, a period of intense feeding that preceded their winter dormancy. During this time, bears could consume up to 20,000 calories per day, dramatically increasing their body weight in preparation for months without food. Bruno, the 350-pound male, had been at Zoo, Montana for 8 years and was generally considered docile and predictable. Bella, slightly smaller at 280 pounds, was known for her playful nature and strong food motivation. Both bears had been rescued as orphaned cubs and had lived their entire adult lives in captivity, making them seem almost domesticated to the staff who worked with them daily. The fatal mistake occurred when Robert decided to enter the exhibit during the bears' active feeding period. His weekly inspections typically took place when the animals were secured in their holding areas, But scheduling conflicts had pushed this inspection to mid-afternoon, exactly when Bruno and Bella were consuming their pre-hibernation meal. North American black bears like Bruno may weigh up to 400 pounds, but can move 300-pound rocks and bite with 800 psi. With claws up to 4 inches, they climb, dig, and hunt with ease. During hyperphagia, food obsession can override caution, making even captive bears aggressive. Despite their size, they can run up to 30 miles per hour, making them swift and dangerous when provoked. Robert had performed similar inspections hundreds of times over his 15-year career at Zoo Montana. The bears had always ignored his presence during feeding, focusing entirely on their food while he checked fencing, examined vegetation, and documented any maintenance needs. This routine had created a sense of familiarity that masked the inherent danger of the situation. What Robert didn't fully appreciate was how dramatically the pre-hibernation period had altered Bruno's behavior. The massive male had been displaying increased food aggression for several days, a natural response to the biological imperative to consume as many calories as possible before winter. This heightened food drive had made Bruno more territorial and less tolerant of any perceived competition for resources. At 3:15 p.m., as the Montana sun cast long shadows across the exhibit, Robert entered through the keeper gate and began his routine inspection. Bruno and Bella were approximately 30 yards away, focused on a scatter feeding of apples, fish, and specially formulated bear biscuits. The scene appeared peaceful and normal, with both animals engaged in the methodical consumption that characterized their species. Robert worked his way through the exhibit, checking fence integrity and examining the artificial den structures where the bears would eventually hibernate. Robert walked within 15 feet of the primary feeding area, where Bruno was consuming a large salmon. In Bruno's hormonally altered state, Robert's proximity to the food source triggered a powerful territorial response. Bruno's charge was swift and devastating. Despite weighing 350 pounds, the bear covered the distance between them in seconds, his powerful legs propelling him forward with surprising speed. Robert had time to turn toward the keeper exit and take perhaps 2 steps before Bruno's massive paws knocked him to the ground. Robert's radio call was brief but clear. The transmission cut off as the bear's weight drove him to the ground, knocking the radio from his hand and making further communication impossible. The attack was brief but devastating. Bruno used his massive paws to pin Robert to the ground, while his jaws clamped down on Robert's shoulder and neck. The assault lasted approximately 45 seconds, long enough to cause fatal injuries, but brief enough that Robert remained conscious throughout most of the encounter. Other staff members heard Robert's emergency call and rushed to the exhibit, arriving within 90 seconds. They immediately began emergency protocols, using air horns and water hoses to distract Bruno while preparing tranquilizer equipment. The bear responded to the distraction, backing away from Robert and retreating to the far corner of the exhibit. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and found Robert conscious but severely injured. The bear's powerful jaws had caused massive trauma to his shoulder and neck, severing major blood vessels and causing significant blood loss. Despite immediate medical attention and rapid transport to the nearest trauma center, Robert died from his injuries during emergency surgery 2 hours later. The tragedy led to immediate changes in zoo management practices nationwide. Mandatory feeding schedule coordination was implemented, requiring all animal interactions to be suspended during feeding times for large carnivores. New protocols were developed for managing animals during periods of biological change, and improved emergency response procedures were established for large mammal emergencies. While Robert's life was claimed by one of the most dangerous predators, another tragedy had occurred, a moment where night and rain created a very dangerous position between a jaguar and a night staff. August 3, 2013, brought the kind of oppressive heat and humidity that made South Florida summers legendary for their intensity. Even at 2 a.m., the temperature in Miami held steady at 84 degrees, with humidity levels that made the air feel thick and suffocating. David Martinez had always been drawn to the quiet solitude of night shift work. At 35, he possessed the steady nerves and keen observational skills that made him exceptional at supervising Zoo Miami's overnight operations. His 8 years of night shift experience had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated when something was wrong. Unusual sounds, changes in animal behavior, or equipment malfunctions that could pose serious risks. Over the years, he had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of every animal in the facility and took pride in his thorough approach to security rounds. He took his role as the zoo's nighttime guardian seriously, understanding that the safety of both animals and facility depended on his vigilance. Friends described him as reliable and thorough, someone who never cut corners or rushed through important procedures. On this particular night, David was conducting his routine 2 a.m. security check of the Big Cat Building, a state-of-the-art facility that housed the zoo's collection of jaguars, leopards, and other large felines. The building had been designed with multiple layers of security, including reinforced glass barriers, mesh screens, and keeper corridors that allowed staff to observe and care for the animals without direct contact. Onyx, a 180-pound male jaguar, was typically inactive during the night hours. At 7 years old, he was in his prime, possessing all the strength and hunting instincts that made jaguars one of the most formidable predators in the Americas. When David noticed that Onyx appeared to be limping during his patrol of the enclosure, concerned about the animal's welfare, David decided to get a closer look by entering the keeper corridor that ran behind the exhibit. This narrow walkway was separated from the animal enclosures by heavy-duty mesh barriers designed to withstand the strength of large cats. What David didn't know was that the severe thunderstorm earlier that evening had caused significant damage to the facility's infrastructure. Hurricane-force winds had loosened several critical bolts in the mesh barrier between the keeper corridor and Onyx's enclosure, creating a structural weakness that wasn't immediately visible in the dim lighting of the nighttime facility. Jaguars are the third largest big cats and have the strongest bite, up to 1,500 pounds per square inch. Unlike others, they kill by crushing skulls or piercing the brain. Agile in water and trees, their compact build packs explosive power. Even in captivity, their instincts and speed remain deadly. As David moved closer to get a better view, Onyx became aware of his presence. Jaguars are naturally curious and opportunistic predators, and the combination of David's proximity and the compromised barrier created a dangerous situation. When Onyx pressed against the mesh to investigate the human on the other side, the loosened bolts gave way. The barrier failure was sudden and catastrophic. David found himself trapped in a narrow space barely 6 feet wide with 180 pounds of apex predator. David's training kicked in immediately. He activated his radio and managed to broadcast a brief emergency call. The transmission was clear enough for the night security guard to understand the situation and immediately call for emergency assistance. But even before backup could come, in a swift second, Onyx leaped toward David. Unlike other big cats that typically target the throat, the jaguar's powerful jaws clamped down on David's shoulder, while his claws raked across his torso. David fought desperately for his life, using his hands to try to push Onyx away while attempting to protect his vital organs. His years of security training had taught him basic self-defense, but no amount of human training could match the evolutionary perfection of a jaguar's killing instincts. The attack lasted for 2 minutes. David's experience and physical fitness helped him survive longer than might have been expected, but he was fighting a battle that no human could win. Onyx's predatory instincts had been fully triggered, and the jaguar methodically worked to subdue what he perceived as prey. When emergency responders finally gained access to the keeper corridor, they found David unconscious and severely injured while Onyx crouched nearby, his golden eyes reflecting the beam of their flashlights. The jaguar showed no fear of the humans, having claimed his territory through violence. Tranquilizer darts were deployed immediately, and within 60 seconds, Onyx was sedated and removed from the corridor. Emergency medical personnel worked frantically to stabilize David, but the damage was extensive. David was rushed to the nearest trauma center, where surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage. Despite their heroic efforts and David's strong physical condition, he died from complications related to blood loss and organ damage 14 hours after the attack. The tragedy led to immediate changes in zoo security protocols. mandatory post-storm structural inspections were implemented, requiring detailed assessments of all animal barriers before facilities could resume normal operations. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now